Welcome to Mission Revive, a podcast dedicated to hope and healing through God's transforming love. We're your hosts, anchored in truth and armed with faith, are changing the world and reviving hearts with Jesus, one conversation at a time.
Hi, welcome to this episode of the Mission Revive podcast. I'm Bob Newberry. I am a board member of Revive Hope and Healing Ministries, a collection of Catholic apostolates impelled by the Holy Spirit. My partner, as always, for today's podcast is Costa, founder and executive director of Revive Hope and Healing Ministries. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we've overcome some difficulties to finally get this guest on air, and I'm very pleased about it. So I know it's going to be a magnificent discussion, and I think he's going to be a repeat guest because I know that we have so much to talk about. And let's hear about who he is. That's Randall Smith, Dr. Randall Smith.
Yep.
He is Professor of Theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and he is a research fellow at the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. He completed a BA in chemistry at Cornell College in Iowa. He has a master's degree in theology at the University of Dallas and a Ph.D. in medieval studies and philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. And I can tell you that he is with all of those degrees, he is one of the most down-to-earth people I think I've ever talked to with all the problems that we've had. So it's going to be a rousing discussion. He is also an author of several books, including How to Read a Sermon by Thomas Aquinas, a beginner's guide. He's also written Aquinas, Bonaventure, and the Scholastic Culture of Medieval Paris. From Here to Eternity, his newest book, Reflections on Death, Immortality, and the Resurrection of the Body. And he has a book coming out called Mapping Bonaventure's Journey into God. And it's a commentary on St. Bonaventure's journey of the mind into God, which is going to be coming out from Cambridge University Press. His articles, this is how I found out about him, appear regularly in the Catholic media, including the New Oxford Review, the Catholic World Report, and the Catholic Thing. He's married to a brilliant poet, and I love poets, so I'm sure she's magnificent. And the favorite vehicle that he likes to drive is a school bus. So see what I mean? He's just a fun guy. Come on and talk with us. Come on in, Doctor.
Hey, thank you. Can I just make one small correction? That was so very kind of you to say all that. But just so people know, the book is From Here to Eternity, Reflections on Death, Immortality. I don't want people to think that I wrote a book on death and immorality.
Is that what I said? Did I say immorality?
Yeah. Anyway, so it's just, it's perfectly fine. I'm not sure people would pay attention at all, really, actually. But that's my experience teaching with students, did they really hear any of it? But anyway, you just want to make sure that people he wrote about death and immorality. Okay, anyway. But
thank you for that clarification.
If they bought the book wanting to know more about immorality, I don't think the book will tell them anything about immorality.
They're going to be disappointed, huh?
Yeah, they're going to be disappointed. But it will tell them why immortality is not a good idea. Anyway, and the resurrection of the body actually is a much better idea.
That sounds very interesting. So you were talking about your students, and that is really what predominantly drew me to you was an article that you wrote in 2017 for the Catholic Thing in April. And it said, know thyself. You wrote a couple of articles on that topic, probably write copiously about it. But it really drew me because I'm studying the idea of self-love as a virtue and self-love as a vice and kind of thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And that article I came across, and you talked about your students and giving them a test, like a self-assessment. How well do they really know each other? I know themselves. And you said something that really triggered me, that they live their lives as if they're in a movie, right? Mm-hmm. And that was in 2017. And I thought to myself, that was light years ago when you think about it, right? When you think about what the world was like in 2017 and what it's like now, can you tell us what's going on with those students? Do they know themselves?
Well, no, I mean, this is as I mentioned to you, that partially the reason this came out, I mean, the ultimate inspiration for this wasn't me so much, but I was inspired by Pope John Paul II's encyclical Fides et Ratio. He's been a major inspiration in my life and in my becoming Catholic, actually. But anyway, in Fides et Ratio, he talks about the fundamental questions of meaning, and it starts out, that encyclical, with that admonition, know thyself. And he says, quite rightly, that this was an admonition which was written over the doors, the portal of the temple at Delphi, the Oracle of Apollo, which was one of the most sacred shrines in all of Greece, that you were supposed to know thyself. And it was taken up then by the Platonic school, and it's been very important. Now, as I always say to my students, look, it was written over the doors of the temple, not because it was the default setting of human beings, but as, you know, a piece of advice, like you really ought to know yourself, as though most people don't. And I also oftentimes have them read Walker Percy's or sections of Walker Percy's Lost in the Cosmos. And he's very good about showing people that, yeah, we really don't know ourselves very well. But part of what I then did, as you saw in that reading, was I would have my students do a kind of self-analysis, you know, self-knowledge survey. And at the time, I just pulled something out of, is years ago, I do something slightly different now, something out of Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective. Actually, I think I did the one out of his later book called First Things First. And I did that, A, because it was available, and B, because you know, a lot of students come to college and they want to be successful in business. And I thought, well, here's a major best-selling business book, guys, right? I mean, this isn't some theology thing. This is like, you know, a guy who does business, okay? Anyway, and so I said, so here's what Stephen Covey thinks is really important for people to do. And I assigned them. I said, okay, look, I'm not going to grade this. I'm not even going to read it, but I want you to do it, okay? And what happened was, you know, I would assign it like on a Thursday, and then the next Tuesday it was due. And I would say, okay, how many people did the First Things First, you know, self-knowledge sort of thing? And there were questions like, what would bring about quality of life results in this area? What would bring about quality of life results in this area? What do you think about yourself and these, you know, your strengths, your weaknesses, etc. And I went over this. There's just questions like this, okay? I mean, it's not. Anyway, so when we came to the next Tuesday, how many people did the self, you know, knowledge survey? And maybe one or two would kind of go, right, you know, and it was like no one had done it, right? And I said, okay, now explain to me what was more important between Thursday and today over the weekend than thinking about quality of life results for yourself, right? And you know, then the couple of students had maybe started it or something. And I said, so you started it, but you didn't finish it. Why not? It was like, well, it was kind of hard. And I said, well, why was it hard, right? I mean, these weren't questions in integral calculus or something. These are just questions about yourself. And presumably you spent your whole life with yourself, and you know, you should know yourself. And so what's the problem? And so I said, well, look, I really want you to do this. And I'm going to ask you halfway through the semester, you know, like in another couple of weeks, and I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to do this. And again, nobody would do it.
Wow.
Because it's a very difficult thing to do, actually, for most people.
Yeah.
What's the difficulty, Doctor, do you think?
Well, I mean, do you want to look honest? I mean, look, why do people, you know, why are they resistant to going to confession, we might say, right? I mean, those of us who know confession, and I always tell my students this, you know, when I was growing up, I had friends in my neighborhood who were Catholic, and I always thought confession was the craziest thing ever, right? Because who would tell their sins to some person,
Yes.
you know? And then when you become Catholic, you realize, and I do tell my students this, like, look, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Okay, but who isn't resistant in a way to, I mean, no matter how good you say to yourself, yeah, this is so important, this is so good, you're still resistant about like going and being honest with yourself about like, I did these things,
Yeah.
and I have these problems, you know,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
It's easier just to get lost. I mean, in the same way, this is Stephen Covey's pretty good about this. It's the same way people get, when businesses get involved in process. and forget to think about goals, right?
Yeah.
Where am I headed, and why am I headed that way, and what do I want to produce?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I'm too busy. And it's
Yeah,
hard.
we forget, don't we? I mean,
Yeah.
in the span of a lifetime, which is a nanosecond to God, I mean, we forget where we're headed. We forget what the goal is,
Right.
and it's very
So
makes
again,
it difficult, doesn't
and the
it?
difficulty is, again, most of us are, or a lot of us are operating by default rather than by design. Right. I mean, in other words, let's just take students for a minute. It's kind of like, why are they in college? Is another one of the questions I start out with, like, what are you doing here? And of course, the answer to that question is, well, this is a required course at the University of St. Thomas, right? They're not there because they like live their whole lives to be there. They are required to be there. But I said, but look, that just merely, provokes another question. What are you doing here at the University of St. Thomas? What are you doing in a university? And the truth is, for most of them, it was like, well, you went from grade 1 to 12. And when, certain people with certain cultural expectations go from grade 12 to grade 13 and then grade 14, right? And they go to college because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And they sort of sleepwalk through it because they don't know really why they're there or what they want to achieve.
Doctor, what are the implications of, well, first of all, that observation resonates with me, and I've spent many years and come to a similar kind of conclusion. But what are the implications of that for, let's say, on the parish level of faith formation for young kids? And
well,
go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go ahead. Finish your question. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
Well, I was part of a planning meeting about a week ago, and the question came up about including adoration in the agenda for these young kids. These are middle school, high school age kids, and there was some resistance from some of the adults on doing that because and the rationale was that kids like to be interactive, and learning is an active process, and there was really kind of a resistance to quiet time in front of Jesus and reflecting, and I just found it really, really curious. Even there was resistance on the adults' part to integrate that kind of an experience into the agenda for the kids as part of their faith formation. So,
did you ask the adults whether they like quiet time?
Well, I'm going to guess. I'm going to.
I imagine they maybe did, but it is a funny thing that we sort of think of young people as, a different species or something, and so that, if you like a book or you like music, then and you value time where you can be, quiet and make all the noise of the world go away and kind of focus on what's really important, then look, kids are kids, that's true, but then you develop in them. But I don't have any answers for your parish other than, again, my first question would be, do you value this sort of time? And if they don't, well, then that's your answer. And if they do, it's like, well, why wouldn't you think, people who do that, and I'm one of those people, find such time really, really extremely valuable. I can tell you, for example, that my poet wife, who was not a Catholic when I married her, but she's a Catholic now, she's still very new in a certain way in terms of the Catholicism thing. One of the things that she really values is, time in front of the Eucharist, strangely. And again, it's not something she grew up with or, deeply pious. It's just a very, very powerful thing. And so you might say, look, again, nothing's going to work for everybody, I suppose. Yes. Some people like the rosary. Some people like, the Liturgy of the Hours. But I think there's going to be a group of young people that are going to really say, this is some of the best time because I just am quiet, right? And it is something you have to, I suppose, learn to, quiet all those voices and just sort of be. But Yeah, I mean, again, and by the same token, it's hard to sit by yourself and be quiet, right? We like to divert ourselves, in all sorts of ways. I mean, I know that. I mean, I know better than anybody else in that regard. Okay. I mean, it's like, yeah, when you're sitting at mass, I mean, we all have that thing. We're sitting at mass, like, oh, here's the word of God. All right. And here's the Eucharistic prayer, and Christ is, and you're thinking about like, my shoes need to be polished. What am I going to wear to that, conference next week? Do I have that tie? Anyway, just stupid stuff that couldn't be any less important when Jesus is, the incarnation is in front of you anyway.
Is in front of you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to interject a question. It wasn't on our list, but of what we presented to you, but you had said that you weren't born Catholic. Was it a quest for truth that brought you into the Catholic Church? Was it St. John Paul II? What drew you?
Yeah, yes to both. It was really the way I oftentimes describe it is to say, well, when I was a freshman in college, for the first time, I started to read things like Plato and Aristotle and Cicero and Augustine. And I became convinced there were such things as truth and goodness and beauty. These were the fit objects of study, and one ought to devote one's life to that. And I oftentimes then say, and once I had sort of put myself on that road, it had only one real end, right? Now, of course, that might seem presumptuous to be, but anyway, but that was my determination about that. Now, I wasn't received into the church until my senior year, so this wasn't like, a short process. And I had a lot of intellectual questions that needed to be sort of resolved and things in my life that needed to change. Fortunately, I was with a group of people who took these kinds of serious, fundamental questions very seriously.
Yeah.
And that was really important for me. So community was very important. And of course, when people say, oh, so this is an intellectual conversion, I say, well, yes, there was a lot of thinking and reading and talking with people about it. But of course, in the end, it's always the Holy Spirit, right? But so yeah, intellectual, but also, anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Sure does.
And then, of course, Pope John Paul II.
Yeah.
Pope John Paul II was a big part of that in his own way. Augustine was a big, again, like a couple of things. First of all, you read Augustine, you read Thomas Aquinas, for example, and even Aristotle and Plato. I don't want to say even, and even when I was reading them, I thought to myself, who takes these guys seriously anymore? Right. Who says to themselves, oh, I have to think through this, and I have to care about what these people say. And I thought to myself, the only people who do that are Catholics, right? Nobody else. There's plenty of people who read Aristotle and Plato, whatever, but they don't really care. They're not going to change their lives or something because they found something in Aristotle. Oh no, Aristotle's right. I have to live differently, right? I have to develop the virtues. And I thought, again, plenty of people sort of read Aristotle, but they didn't want to develop the virtues at all. It was just an intellectual game. And that was the one thing I thought, well, I'm not interested in the intellectual game. This is either about your life or forget it, because I was a chemistry major, I didn't really, this is stuff I was doing on the side.
I noticed that you're well, two things that struck me as I looked at your resume and your publications. One was, man, your interests are in many wide divergent areas, starting as a chemistry major. But the other is, I'd like to look at your work schedule.
I'm pretty lazy, actually, if you want to know.
Well, I look at your output. Your productivity is just holy smokes! It's breathtaking. But
yeah, well, actually, well, thank you. That's very kind. It's funny. I was just looking at the publications of a professor here at the University of Texas at Austin, a classicist who is very interesting. Anyway, I don't mention his name; it's not important. But anyways, he's emeritus, and somebody said you should go meet him. He's very, very nice, and he's in every day and stuff. And so anyway, I was looking at his stuff, and I realized, oh my God, right? There's always somebody who's got uh 800 more publications than you do, and it's, like, oh, author of 40 books, and you're like, oh, 40 books.
Well,
Oh my God. Like, if
I'm
I
still
had 3
available.
lifetimes, I'm not publishing anyway. All right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
but it's very kind of you to say, right? I mean,
Well,
so
no, there's a quick observation.
yeah.
Yeah. And I'd like to ask the professor about some work that we've started to do in our ministry, and we're being influenced by a Thomistic approach to psychology, and a Thomistic kind of anthropology of man, and is that a topic that you've spent some time working with?
Oh yeah. Well, look, I mean, I'm not as one of the things about having a broad education is people don't, you're not supposed to do that.
Specialize. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're supposed to specialize. So I've always been annoying to administrators when they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm doing philosophy and theology. No. Which one are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm doing philosophy and theology. And like, no. Yeah. Anyway, so, but no, I do. It's an interest of mine. And well, look, anything in a way, Thomistic is probably going to be a good thing to spend your time on. Right. If you haven't seen the volume that came out through the Divine Mercy University on the human person, it's very, very good, right? And will give you a very nice sort of background. And one of the pieces of that was written by my friend Paul Gondreau, who talks about who's trained at Freiburg and under Father Servet Pinkers. And that tradition has spent a lot more time dealing with the passions, right? Or the emotions. And it seems to me that's where modern psychology has had to fill in and has done a good job in some ways of filling in, where modern moral philosophy has simply dropped out. In other words, for much of modern moral philosophy, other than the virtue ethics tradition, but anyway, much of modern moral philosophy, they treat human beings as a kind of thinking thing, right? Like Descartes says. And so the fact that they have emotions and passions is kind of well, that would get in the way. Why do we have to think about that, et cetera, et cetera? Whereas if you look at Thomas Aquinas, there's a whole long section on what they call the passions, right? Which we call the emotions. It's a sort of a similar idea. If you think about it, actually passions as opposed to actions, right? Passions are things that happen to you, right? You get frightened. You don't choose to be frightened, right? And emotions the same way. You're like moved, emoted, right? In other words, the root is the same sort of thing. The idea is it's something that, you don't necessarily control its origin in you. You see something and you desire it. You're frightened. You get angry, right? Things trigger your anger. And so again, Aquinas has given a lot of thought to that. And at the Divine Mercy University, they have had, people like Paul Vitz from NYU and Jonathan Robinson, who's now dead. And so anyway, had all sorts of interesting people come who had background in the history of psychology and thinking about psychology, and tried to put together and did put together, a wonderful volume on, the nature of the human person. Including this dimension that you seem to be interested in, namely, the psychology side. But I think the virtue of their approach is precisely that they want to see and Thomas's approach, etc. They want to see the passions in the context of a whole understanding of the human person,
right?
Who's both rational and and bodily and communal. Finds themselves in a context, right? Can talk through their emotions with other people. Anyway, So if you haven't found that volume on the nature of the human person, I have a link to it actually on my website. We can deal with that, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you for that.
Can you give us your website?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, it's on my course website, which if you want to look at the course I do on Christ and the Moral Life, that's a generally access website. And you can look at it. It's t4.sttom.edu. /users/Smith/Christ moral life. Okay, so that's why I was saying maybe I would just send it to you.
But you have another website, a general website, right?
I do. That one is t4.sttom.edu/users/Smith/portfolio. Because originally I used it as my portfolio for tenure and promotion. But now it's just my website.
We got that on record. So if we start
all right.
that in, we'll find you.
Right.
We can include that in the notes for the podcast.
I just mean that, like, again, if you want, I can make sure I send you that volume. It's a very good thing, right? I mean, again, these are guys who are men and women, right, who are really trying to think deeply about precisely the question you're thinking about, right? Like, how can we integrate the insights of modern psychology into a fuller picture of human anthropology, right, as understood by the church, right?
That's right.
Divine revelation, right? What do we know through the incarnation of Jesus Christ about what does it reveal to us about human nature?
Yes.
Is that what drew you through with John Paul II? Was it some of his theology of the body work, or?
That was important. I mean, again, well, look, in a sense, for somebody who was like me, okay, who was a kind of secular humanist kid of the usual sort, right? I mean, does it make sense? I mean, my parents had been somewhat religious when I was younger, but then they fell away from any kind of church, they became nuns, should we say, N-O-N-E-S, right? And yes. I was happy enough when we moved and they moved away from a church they had sort of been going to. I was happy enough not to waste a Sunday doing any of that sort of stuff. Anyway, so when I got to Cornell College, I was not, religious in any way, shape, or form. I was, again, your basic secular humanist kid. And so for me, as I think many people find this, when you all of a sudden start to find religious people, people who are interested in religion, who actually are thinking, right, like really interesting stuff, it's quite a shock, right? I mean, when I was in high school, I sort of thought of religious people as, like they like guitar music and waterfalls and singing Kumbaya and stuff. And that's very sweet. I just, it wasn't anything I wanted to do. I like waterfalls, but I don't like sitting around campfires and singing Kumbaya and guitar music and stuff. I just like, okay. Again, it was just like, that's very sweet for them. And if you like that sort of thing, in the same way that if you like jazz, you go to jazz bars and stuff. But if you don't like jazz, you probably don't go to jazz bars. And I was like, okay, there you go. So the notion that there were actually people who were religious, like Augustine, who really were thinking, or Aquinas, who are just smart as a whip. And you're like, wow, okay, this is a whole different universe of stuff, right? And people who not only are smart as a whip, Aquinas, but smarter than Aristotle. Okay, now we're in a different universe completely. So anyway, that was, for somebody who was studying chemistry to, like go over and then to be looking at some of this stuff and realizing that there were just really, really smart people who had real arguments and were really thinking through some of the most serious questions. That was really important. And of course, John Paul II was an impressive character in all sorts of ways. Intellectually.
Yeah, your description of your development is just so refreshing, because you're really talking about intellectual curiosity, right? You're trying to make sense out of this thing, and
the Catholic thing, right?
Yes, and hey, that would be a great publication name, right? The Catholic thing.
I know, but that's what drew me to it in the first place, actually, right? Was I thought, wow, what a great name, the Catholic thing.
But your curiosity is really in pursuit for truth is really what led you down this road that you just described. And
I mean, that's why when there's a classic phrase that philosophy begins and science, I mean, scientia, science, knowledge, begins in wonder. That's an old tradition that goes back to the ancient Greeks and Plato, etc. Philosophy begins in wonder. And it is sort of tragic that people, I was just talking to somebody last night about teaching mathematics, and how tragic it is that people don't have wonder about mathematics, that it just becomes this kind of mechanism, and people don't think about number or what mathematics is or mathematics does.
Yes.
And that anyway, it is sad that we somehow, our educational system, and I don't blame systems, I mean, it is hard, right? Anyway, that we get caught up and we lose our sense of wonder about the world, right?
Yeah.
So that we ask these big questions like, why does it happen? Why does it do, look, that's the root of science. Clearly, everybody knows. I mean, everybody should know that, like, why would that happen? Why does that do that? What would if we, that's what drives science, right? Not desire for Nobel Prizes, but a desire to kind of say, I don't really understand this. Why?
Yes.
And again, who says that? Aristotle, right? Yes. Man by nature desires to know, and to know the causes of things, right?
Can I ask one last question? And the clock is ticking, I know, but
sure. I feel like we're just getting started. But go ahead.
Yes. There's this synod thing that's about to unfold in front of us, right?
It's like the Catholic thing, only this is a synod thing.
The synod thing, and
the synod on synodality. Yeah.
And I'm reading the back and forth between the 5 cardinals and the Pope, and it seems that part of what's going on is has to do with this anthropology of the human being, and the view of the human being. Is that changing? Is it open to change? I so appreciated John Paul II's use of that phrase, the anthropology of man or of the person, and doing his theology of the body work. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on all of that.
Well, you have somebody here who's off praying for this podcast. That's probably the best thing you can do, I imagine, right? For the synod on synodality. I have no particular insight on, what's going to happen at the synod on synodality any more than anybody else does. I mean, I try to spend the least amount of time that I can on thinking about things in the Vatican of that sort. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of papal teaching, anything like that. I merely said, like, there's a kind of politics to the Vatican, or even in parishes, like what's happening in the parish council. What do they want here? And there's people, and it's kind of like, or at university, same thing. There's always disputes about stuff. I try to, as much as possible, not pay much attention, because there's more important things to think about, like Jesus and salvation and, love and what it means to love God and love your neighbors yourself. Like each day you get up and you say to yourself, well, I'm supposed to love God and love my neighbors myself. What does that mean? I mean, what am I supposed to do? How could I, structure my life today to do that? And also interesting things like, gee, what is mathematics and how do triangles work? I don't know, interesting stuff. And that's less interesting. And, but having said that, like, I don't want to downplay your question. It's not like it's unimportant. Yes, I think you're right. They would be well advised, should we say, and maybe well advised to think about whatever they're going to think about in terms of the anthropology, as we say, the philosophy of the human person, or the theology of the human person, that has been established over generations by the church, and especially given attention since the Vatican Council by people, and before, actually, there had been a kind of Christian humanism, and which culminated in the Second Vatican Council. John Paul II and Benedict were very good about reaffirming this. And they would be, again, well advised to do that. Now, particularly because that was an anthropology that was based on the incarnation, right? I mean, God, that passage in Gaudium et Spes, the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, which John Paul II quoted in every one of his encyclicals, was that it's in the mystery of the incarnation that the mystery of man takes on light. Gaudium et Spes 22. And so they think of themselves as enunciating a anthropology, as it were, based on God revealing. In other words, if we take, let me take a step back. If we think that man, as Christians, and not only Christians do, right, man is made in the image of God. If God has revealed himself in and through, most fully, in and through the person of Jesus Christ, then by looking at Christ, we can understand what it is to be fully, truly human, right? What it is to be in the image of God. So God, by revealing himself to man, reveals man to himself, to put it in another way, right? And so by looking at the incarnation, we understand something more about who we are and who we're truly meant to be. Because as fallen creatures, right, we oftentimes, if you say, what are human beings like? The answer is, well, they're cruel, they're selfish, right? They're foolish. They are ruled by their passions. And I mean, right, like there's all sorts of problems that we have. But if we understand how God reveals himself in and through Christ, and we understand something more about the triune God, right, how God is this eternal communion of love, then we understand that the claim is that we understand more about what it is to be Christian, and we're not guided by, our foolish opinions.
Yeah.
And God then is unchanging. All right. It's not like, we might say whether it's true or not that human beings change much over time. And they do in certain ways. I myself am a little skeptical about the degree in which, people suggest human beings change. I worry about things. I imagine people in the Roman world worried about things. I have altruistic tendencies. I imagine people in the Roman world had altruistic. I don't know. I never think of myself as quite different from the mass of humanity. But however much that's true, certainly what it means to be in the image of God, and in the way that God wills, is not going to change. So that's a touchstone for us.
Yeah.
So one hopes they keep going with that. So one hopes they keep going back to that. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun, really.
In a way, in terms of the human reality, we have nuclear power. People will say like, well, we have this technology. And the point is, yeah, we do. Right. There's new stuff that way. But then you're right. Ecclesiastes is kind of like, but in the end, you go out, you do your daily work, because what do you think?
Yeah. Right. God doesn't say.
Everybody's going to die in the end. Okay. Right.
But that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That inspires wonder, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the reality that inspires true wonder?
Yeah.
So,
no, that is true. And for that, you should read my book, From Here to Eternity. I didn't think of that just to pump that book. But anyway, I think it is important that we have that thing, because in fact, if you look at the ancient Greeks, always when they tell these stories about immortality, it always ends very badly, right? The desire for immortality is in every person, they understand, but the reality of actual human immortality is always very bad, right? Yeah. Anyway, there is a way in which people who are granted immortality always wish for death, because it's just a very bad thing. So there is a gift. On the other hand, throughout the scriptures, death is always the enemy, right? Because it's oblivion. And so it's a great gift that we have this idea, right? And this revelation of something that transcends death, a different kind of life. But anyway, I don't know whether we want to go there right at the moment.
Yeah.
But
this is the topic of your book, though, your newest book.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to go there.
I'm glad you did.
Really akin to what we are doing. We call what we do the restoration of the human person in the grand, just the context of the ministries that we have. Mm-hmm. And we call it Return to Eden, because really that is who we are. That is what we're doing. That is, we're returning to that place of Eden, right? So there is that destination, and everything that we do is part of that journey, and it's God ordained, and it's God, it's blessed in many ways. So mm-hmm. that's how we approach our ministries. So
just so you remember, I've been writing about this. Actually, it's a really wonderful book by Anglican theologian Oliver O'Donovan, and he points this out, and I think it's important actually that even in Eden, right, we would have needed to be elevated, right? When we return to that state, we're returning merely to the state where now, right, we're free to be elevated, right? And it's interesting because, in fact, if you have read Dante, the earthly paradise is not in heaven, it's actually at the top of Mount Purgatory. And so after Dante has reached, the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden at the top of Mount Purgatory, we still got, purifications, and he's got a long way to go. Yes. All right, now he's just sort of reached like, okay, what is that in the Monopoly? Return to the beginning, return to go. And don't collect $200 or something like that. So anyway, there's a kind of like, okay, now you're back at where you needed to be to get going. Anyway.
Yes.
Well put.
Yeah, very cool. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Do you have
anything else?
I don't. I mean, I could stay here all day, but I really appreciate your time, Dr. Smith. This is wonderful.
I got nothing else to do. I'm, as I told you, I'm totally lazy. We could simply talk all day. Whenever my students come to me and I say, look, the problem isn't coming to talk to me. The problem is you have to keep track of your own time, because I have no sense of time. So I will have been in class for, 25, 30 minutes, and I'll think I've been there for about 5 minutes, and I'll look at my watch and go, oh my God, I got 20 minutes to get through. Anyway, so yes, I have no sense of how long we've been doing this, so we could do it all day, but you probably have important things to do. So,
You know what that means, though? That means that you're in your true vocation, because when you lose yourself in time that way, that means that you're doing what God has ordained you to do, and there's no concept of that. That happens when I write. Does it happen when you write?
Yeah.
When you write books too?
Weirdly, I never expected myself to be that way in any way, shape, or form. I was, and still am, not a good writer, et cetera, et cetera. And so the fact that writing has become that, where time goes, is very strange to me. So for those people who are in your audience who are like, yeah, I'm not a very good writer, it's really hard for me, et cetera, et cetera. And, if they're in high school and college, all the way through graduate school, oh, how did I get to be in graduate school and such a terrible writer? I mean, how do I write things for the Catholic thing? It's like, but, if you just keep writing every day, it does get better, strangely enough. But I mean, I always tell people that, like, oh, you wrote a lot, you must have, it's like natural writer or something. No, absolutely not. Okay. Very, very, again, always thought I would be a person who would, oral teaching, that I sort of thought. And when students ask me, why did you become a teacher? I said, well, because I didn't want to get a real job. I would spend all my time sitting around talking to people endlessly. And, one day I thought to myself, I wonder whether somebody would pay me to do this. I didn't really kind of do anyway, but that's what I tell my students. They laugh, and, I think, and I said, so what a scam, like I just get to come in and like talk to people for hours and hours and hours, and they actually pay me for this. Not a lot, but okay. I get enough to like eat. And so it's kind of a scam. I feel bad. Like they're paying all this money. What makes me feel bad, though, is all the money isn't coming to me. But anyway, it would make me feel worse if all the huge tuition, that they were paying to the college was coming to me, because I'm just enjoying myself. Yeah. So, I should feel worse than I do and have less fun in the classroom than I do. It's like here, I mean, I'm in a podcast.
Speaking like a true Catholic right now.
I should have less fun. Yeah, exactly. I should suffer through these things. Right. It's sort of weird. It's like, oh, is this podcast going to be like? And I always have fun in them. And so I don't know. I should have less fun, I think.
Does that mean you'll entertain a future invitation from us to come back?
Anytime.
Oh, good.
Right. Okay. Like, I don't know, if you have like a half hour, we'll come back. No, anytime. It's fine. Yeah.
Oh, this is so wonderful. I love that you're teaching young people how to think and getting them in touch with those old guys, because those old guys really know what they're talking about. And it'll really, It's really
and by guys we mean, and I'm not saying this is to be woke, but we mean men and women. Here's why. I'm sorry, I just say this because when you decide to throw in like Therese of Lisieux or Catherine of Siena or Hildegard of Bingen or something like that, now it's really serious, right? I mean, there's Ambrose and there's Augustine and whatever. You throw in a few of those sort of women, they are rigorous in a way that, or you read Perpetua and Felicity, they're tough. Mostly with people like, you stay away from, do people stay away from their women? And I say, I don't think they're staying away from them because they're just so rigorous and tough. And it's a vision which is way beyond what you're going to get in, Augustine or Aquinas and stuff like that. So I think it's.
Oh, Edith Stein. Have you?
Oh yeah, there's another one, Edith Stein. I mean, they're tough, right? You don't get sweetie pie stuff there. Anyway, but let's.
There's our next podcast. There's the next topic of the next podcast. Okay.
Whatever you want. Right.
Okay.
You can see, like, I'll just talk about anything, even though I don't know anything about
That's awesome. Great.
All right.
Well,
thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great
so
to meet
much.
you. Yeah.
Take care.
We are grateful that you joined us today for another episode of the Mission Revive podcast. We humbly ask for your prayers as we continue in the mission entrusted to us to evangelize and revive hearts with Jesus. We would also ask that you prayerfully consider becoming a sponsor of this podcast or making a financial contribution to support this growing ministry. You can do this by visiting our website at revivehopeandhealing.com or through our Revive Hope and Healing Ministries patron page. We cannot do this without you. Thank you.